The continuation of chapter 31. Very well, said Alarira, and if I win, my lord, perhaps you will be so good as to accept my life in return for my people's safety. I will, said the Black Rabbit, but if I win, Alarira, you shall give me both your tail and your whiskers. The bobstones were brought, and Alarira sat down in the cold and the echoes to play against the Black Rabbit of Inlay. Now, as you may suppose, Alarira knew how to play bobstones. He could play as well as any rabbit that had ever covered their cast. But there, in that dreadful place, with the Black Rabbit's eyes upon him, and the Owsla, who made no sound, try as he would, his wits deserted him, and even before he cast, he felt that the Black Rabbit knew what was down. The Black Rabbit never showed the least haste. He played as the snow falls, without sound or change, until at last Alarira's spirit failed him, and he knew that he could not win. You can pay your debt to the Owsla, Alarira, said the Black Rabbit, and they will show you a burrow to sleep in. I shall return tomorrow, and if you are still here, I will see you. But you are free to leave whenever you wish. And then the Owsla took Alarira away, and cut off his tail, and pulled out his whiskers. And when he came to himself, he was alone with Rabscuttle in a hollow stone burrow, with an opening to the mountainside. "Oh, master," said Rabscuttle, "what will you do now? For Frith's sake, let us go away. I can feel for both of us in the dark." "Certainly not," said Alarira. He still hoped to get what he wanted from the Black Rabbit somehow, and he felt sure that they had been put into this burrow so that they would be tempted to steal away. "Certainly not. I can do very well with some willow herbs and clematis. Go and get some, Rabscuttle, but make sure you come back before tomorrow evening. You had better try to bring some food, too, if you can." Rabscuttle went out as he was told, and Alarira was left alone. He slept very little, partly for the pain and partly for the fear that never left him, but chiefly because he was still searching for some trick that would serve his turn. The next day, Rabscuttle returned with some pieces of turnip, and after Alarira had eaten them, Rabscuttle helped him to patch himself up with a grey tail and whiskers, made from the winter drift of dried-out clematis and ragwort. In the evening, he went to meet the Black Rabbit as though nothing had happened. "Well, Alarira," said the Black Rabbit, and he did not wrinkle his nose up and down when he sniffed, but he thrust it forward as a dog does. "My burrow cannot be what you are used to, but perhaps you have done your best to make yourself comfortable?" "Oh, I have, my lord," said Alarira. "I am glad that you allow me to stay." "Perhaps we shall not play bobstones tonight," said the Black Rabbit. "You must understand, Alarira, I have no wish to make you suffer. I am not one of the 1,000. I repeat, you may stay or leave as you please, but if you are going to remain, perhaps you would care to hear a story, and to tell one yourself, if you like." "Oh, certainly, my lord," said Alarira, "and if I can tell a story as good as yours, perhaps you will accept my life and grant the safety of my people." "I will," said the Black Rabbit, "but if not, Alarira, you will have to give up your ears." He waited to see whether Alarira would refuse the wager, but he did not. And then the Black Rabbit told such a tale of fear and darkness that it froze the hearts of Rabscuttle and Alarira, where they crouched on the rock, for they knew that every word was true. Their wits turned. They seemed to be plunged in icy clouds that numbed their senses, and the Black Rabbit's story crept into their hearts like a worm into a nut, leaving them shriveled and empty. And when at last that terrible story ended, Alarira tried to speak, but he could not. He could not collect his thoughts, and he stammered and ran around on the floor, like a mouse will do when the hawk glides low. The Black Rabbit waited silently, with no sign of impatience. At last it was clear that there could be no story from Alarira, and the Owsla took him and put him into a deep sleep. And when he woke, his ears were gone, and only Rabscuttle was beside him in the stone burrow, crying like a kitten. "Oh, master," said Rabscuttle, "what good can this suffering bring you? For the sake of Lord Frith and the green grass, let me take you home." "Nonsense," said Elorira. "Go out and get me 2 great big burdock leaves. They will do very well for my ears." "They will wither, master," said Rabscuttle, "as I am withered now." "They will last long enough," said Elorira grimly, "for what I have to do. But I cannot find the way." When Rabscuttle was gone, Elorira forced himself to think clearly. The Black Rabbit would not accept his life. Also, it was plain that he himself would never be able to win any sort of wager against him. He may as well try to run a race across a sheet of ice. But if the Black Rabbit did not hate him, why did he inflict these sufferings upon him? To destroy his courage and make him give up and go away? But why not simply just send him away? And why wait before hurting him until he himself proposed a bet and lost it? And then the answer came to him suddenly. These shadows had no power either to send him away or to hurt him, except with his own consent. They would not help him, no. They would seek possession of his will and break it if they could. But supposing that he could find among them something that would save his people, could they stop him from taking it away with him? When Rabscuttle came back, he helped Elorira to disguise his horrible maimed head with 2 leaves in place of ears, and after a while they slept. But Elorira kept dreaming of his starving rabbits, waiting in the runs to push back King Darzan's soldiers, and placing all their hopes upon him. And at last he woke, cold and cramped, and he wandered out into the runs of the stone warren. And as he limped along, trailing the dock leaves on either side of his head, for he could not raise or move them, like the ears he had lost, he came to a place from which several narrow runs led down deeper into the ground, and there he found 2 of the ghastly, shadowy Owsla moving about with some dark business of their own. They turned and stared, to make him afraid, but Elorira was now past being afraid, and he stared back at them, wondering what they had in mind to persuade him to lose. "Turn back, Elorira," said one of them at last. "You have no business here in the pit. You are alive and have suffered much already." "Not as much as my people," replied Elorira. "There is enough suffering here for 1,000 warrens," said the shadow. "Do not be stubborn, Elorira. In these holes lie all of the plagues and diseases that come to rabbits: fever, mange, sickness of the bowels. And here, too, in this nearest hole, lies the white blindness that sends creatures hobbling out to die in the fields, where even Elil will not touch their rotting bodies. This is our task, to see that all of these are ready for the use of Inle Ra, for what is what must be." Then Elorira knew that he must give himself no time to think. He pretended to go back, but suddenly he turned, rushed upon the shadows, and plunged into the nearest hole, faster than a raindrop into the ground. And there he lay, while the shadows flickered and gibbered about the entrance, for they had no power to move him, except by fear. After a time they went away, and Elorira was left alone, wondering whether he would be able to reach King Darzan's army in time, without the use of whiskers or ears. At last, when he was sure that he had stayed in the hole long enough to become infected, Elorira came out and began to make his way back along the run. He did not know how soon the disease would appear, or how long he would take to die himself, but plainly he ought to return as quickly as he could, if possible, before there were any sign of illness on him. Without going near Rabscuttle, he must tell him to hurry ahead, to reach the rabbits in the warren, and warn them to block all the holes and stay inside, until King Darzan's army was destroyed. He blundered into a stone in the darkness, for he was shivering and feverish, and in any case he could feel little or nothing without his whiskers. And at that moment a quiet voice said, "Elorira, where are you going?" He had heard nothing, but he knew that the Black Rabbit was beside him. "I am going home, my lord," he replied. "You said I could go home whenever I wished." You have some purpose, Elorira, said the black rabbit. What is it? I've been in the pit, my lord, answered Elorira. I am infected with the white blindness, and I'm going to save my people by destroying my enemy. Elorira, said the black rabbit, do you know how the white blindness is carried by rabbits? And a sudden misgiving seized upon Elorira, and he said nothing. It is carried by fleas that live in rabbits' ears, said the black rabbit. They pass from the ears of a sick rabbit to those of his companions. But Elorira, you have no ears, and fleas will not go to leaves. You can neither catch nor carry the white blindness. Then at last Elorira felt that his strength and courage were gone. He fell to the ground and tried to move, but his back legs dragged along the rocks, and he could not get up. He scuffled and then lay still in the silence. Elorira, said the black rabbit at last, this is a cold warren. It is a bad place for the living, and no place at all for warm hearts and brave spirits. You are a nuisance to me. Go home. I myself will save your people. Do not have the impertinence to ask me when. There is no time here. In fact, they are already saved. In that moment, while King Darzan and his soldiers were still jeering down the holes of the warren, confusion and terror fell upon them in the falling darkness. The fields seemed full of huge rabbits with red eyes, stalking among the thistles. They turned and fled, and they vanished into the night. And that is why no rabbit who tells the tales of Elorira can say exactly what kind of creatures they were or what they looked like. Not one of them has ever been seen from that day to this. When at last Elorira was able to rise to his feet, the black rabbit was gone, and Rabscuttle was coming down the run looking for him. Together they went out to the mountainside and made their way down the stone-rattling gully in the mist. They did not know where they were going, except that they were going away from the black rabbit's warren. But after a time it became plain that Elorira was ill from shock and exhaustion. Rabscuttle dug a hole, and there they stayed for several days. Later, when Elorira began to feel better, they wandered on, but they could not find their way back. They were confused, and they had to beg help and shelter of other animals whom they met. Their journey home lasted 3 months, and many adventures they had. Some of these, as you know, are stories in themselves. Once they lived with a Lendry, and found pheasants' eggs for him in the woods. And once they barely escaped from the middle of a hayfield while the hay was being cut. All this time Rabscuttle looked after Elorira, and brought him fresh leaves and kept the flies from his wounds until they healed. And at last one day they came back to their warren. It was evening, and as the sun stretched out on the hills they could see any number of rabbits at Silflay, nibbling in the grass and playing on ant-heaps. They stopped at the top of a field, sniffing the gorse and other herbs on the wind. Well, they look all right, said Elorira, a healthy lot, really. Let's just slip in quietly and see whether we can find one or two of the Owsla captains. We don't want a lot of fuss being made. They made their way along the hedgerow, but could not altogether get their bearings, because apparently the warren had grown bigger, and there were more holes than there were before, both in the bank and in the field. They stopped to speak to a group of smart young bucks and does sitting under the elder blooms. We need to find Loosestrife, said Rabscuttle. Can you tell us where his burrow is? Never heard of him, answered one of the bucks. Are you sure he lives in this warren? Well, unless he's dead, said Rabscuttle. But surely you must have heard of Captain Loosestrife. He was an officer of the Owsla during the fighting. What fighting? Asked another buck. The fighting against King Darzan, replied Rabscuttle. Hey, do me a favor, old fellow, will you? Said the buck. That fighting, I wasn't even born when it finished. But surely you know the Owsla captains who were, said Rabscuttle. I wouldn't be seen dead with them, said the buck. What? That white-whiskered old bunch? What do we want to know about them? What they did, said Rabscuttle. That war stuff, old fellow, said the first buck. That's all finished now. It's got nothing to do with me. If this Loosestrife fought King What's-His-Name, that's his business, said one of the does. It's not our business, is it? It was all a very wicked thing, said another doe. Shameful, really.